Hi, my name is Lori Furtado, and today I will be presenting my literature review entitled A Comparison of the Use of Telehealth and Autism Intervention Before and Throughout the COVID-19 Pandemic, Motivation, Areas of Research, Limitations, and Areas of Future Research. So, a quick definition of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. It is a neurological and developmental disorder that usually starts within early childhood. Deficits can include things of social communication, such as expressive language delays, receptive language delays, a misunderstanding of figurative language, and take special interest. Again, these are not all things that every person with autism will experience, but these are just a list of things that can. It is a spectrum, so every single person is different. And statistically, one child out of every 68 children are diagnosed with ASD, and that is a number that has been rising over the past many years. The definition of telehealth. So, the use of telephones, emails, asynchronous videos, asynchronous pictures, and synchronous video conferencing can also be known as telemedicine or telepractice. And I have some examples here: Zoom, FaceTime, and Google Meet. But only some forms of telehealth are HIPAA compliant, where the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act mean that they are safe to use for medical reasons or in terms of medical appointments because it protects the privacy and the personal information of the person in the meeting. So, a quick timeline of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have before January 2020, which is the old normal all in person events, no masks. And then we have on January 21st, 2020, the first COVID-19 case in the United States is confirmed by the CDC. February 3rd, the United States declares that COVID-19 is a public health emergency. The World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic on March 11th, 2020. And then on March 17th, 2020, it was declared that telehealth would now be covered by insurance the same way in-person appointments are, which is really big because that's when we start using telehealth as a way to keep people safe and as a way to help with social distancing. And we just quickly look at that highlighted date of January 21st, the first COVID case in the United States is confirmed by the CDC. And you can see there's just a volume of research that was all happening before COVID was even a thing in the United States, looking at how telehealth can be used effectively, or if it can be used effectively in autism intervention, which those are a lot of articles we're going to be talking about today. So what is the reason for before COVID and social distancing for wanting to use telehealth in autism intervention? So before March 2020, there was a lack of trained professionals to provide services, especially in rural and underserved areas. So telehealth was seen as how can we bridge the gap of taking the minimal amount of professionals we do have and spreading their reach. Similarly, there's extensive wait lists for families to get services. And so, again, with the lack of professionals, wait lists were very long. And so, if telehealth professionals can now reach further using telehealth to provide services to more people, well, then those wait lists are going to go down and the wait lists to get services are going to decrease. And then finally, telehealth was seen as a potentially cost-effective way to provide services to people, especially those who are experiencing long and expensive commutes to get services without using telehealth, which is a really big deal. So there's a couple of different type of interventions for autism that were specifically looked at using telehealth. The first is functional analysis and functional communication training. Both of these things are documented as both effective intervention for children with autism as well as an effective intervention strategy that parents can implement themselves. And that parents can be trained to do themselves. Functional analysis is just identifying the reinforcer of a challenging behavior, the reason why a child is using a challenging or problem behavior. And then functional communication training is replacing that problem behavior with an appropriate communication response in order to get that same reinforcer. So if a child is throwing a tantrum because they want a certain snack, instead of throwing a tantrum because they want that snack, what is an appropriate way we can get them to communicate their needs to us? And so this is a way that we can have parents help provide intervention with their child. It's also being looked at using telehealth. How can we use these two, functional analysis and functional communication training, internationally? The U.S. is documented to have a dramatic growth in BCBAs and trained professionals, and a majority of the prep programs for those things are in the United States and very limited in other areas. Like Mexico has one BCBA, Russia only has 9 for the whole country, and Turkey was only documented to have 2. And so how can we get more professionals internationally? Well, the idea is that can we use telehealth as an effective way to spread the reach of services, even internationally to other countries? Is that effective? And so when it comes to just using functional analysis and functional communication training alone over telehealth and then over internationally, both these studies were ones in which the therapist would train the parent on how to implement the intervention over telehealth, and then the parent would be in person with their child implementing the intervention through the coaching of the therapist. So the therapist worked with the parent, and then the parent worked with the child. For both of these, they were seen as effective methods of the coaching was seen as an effective method for parents to implement the training. Parents rated it as acceptable in both studies. In the first study of just looking at functional analysis, it was noted that there was a huge cost deduction in sessions run over telehealth compared to in-person sessions, moving the cost from over $300 a week to only under $60, which is a big drop, although it's noted that this might not be effective for all those with varying motor impairment. And then when we're looking internationally, it was known that it was effective regardless of whether the therapist spoke the family's native language or interpreter was involved, where the interpreter was, whether with the family, with the therapist on a third-party location. And it allowed services for families who may not have a permanent home, which is a really big thing to think about, whether it be families displaced by natural disasters, political unrest, extreme weather, or whatever else the reason, that their services can still be provided. Then we look at graduated guidance, which is basically starting with the most intense prompt and then slowly reducing prompts until a child can complete a task independently. For example, starting with hand over hand, a full physical prompt, moving to partial physical prompts of only a few fingers, shadow prompts of just having your hands around the child's hands, and then only providing the initial verbal prompt. And then also in the same study, they looked at constant prompt delay. So either giving a child a set amount of time in order to respond to a prompt or waiting for the child to give an incorrect response. So if a child responds incorrectly to the prompt or does not respond in the given time, for example, in this study was 5 seconds, then the person provides a prompt for the child to successfully complete the task and then gives the child another chance to either complete the same task independently or complete the next step independently. And then we're also looking at research unit on behavioral interventions for parent training. This is a parent training in which targets common behavioral issues like tantrums, noncompliance, and aggression that cause stress for caregivers and giving a skill approach way for parents to kind of get in the way of those and try to intervene in those behaviors. So looking at antecedent management, reinforcement, and compliance training. For both of these, again, it was seen as effective to coach the parents over telehealth. This was another case where the person worked with the family directly, and the therapist would work with the parents, and then the parents worked with the child. And both were seen as effective in one way, increasing child's independent skills and self-care, even in support with written directions on how to do it, and then also just looking as a preliminary study for future research. It was seen as effective to have a telehealth coaching model. During the COVID-19 pandemic, again, telehealth has a different use. It's meant to kind of help us with social distancing and keeping people safe from getting sick. We have 3 examples here. You have Beacon ABA Services, Shapiro Educational Behavioral Consultants, and then Boston Public Schools, who all use telehealth in different ways. And it all had parent involvement in different ways. So Beacon, they kind of offered both in-person and remote services at the same time. It was a family's choice of which they got involved in. And the parents, when in telehealth services, were required to provide support for their child in order to attend to a computer. At Shapiro Educational and Behavioral Consultants, they did all in-person services and then provided technicians in-home for those who were involved in the virtual social groups that were had. And then Boston Public Schools did for the first school year of 2020 to 2021, offered both in-person and remote services. And then for the recent school year of the 2021 to 2022 school year, only those registered for the full-time homeschool model, home and hospital, received remote services. And again, parents had to provide the support for their children for remote services. So kind of just looking at it in all, there's a lot of future research that needs to be done about especially a parent's role in providing services and what is the best way for a parent to support their child in telehealth services? Is it by them receiving training on how to implement their intervention firsthand, or are they there just to help while the therapist directly provides service to their child? And so there's a lot of research that needs to be done in order to determine what is the most effective way to provide intervention to children with autism and how telehealth can be a tool.